his party would win. And Elbridge Gerry goes on later to become James Madison's vice president and then dies in office. So, he signed the Declaration of Independence. He was at the Constitutional Convention, but decided that he was out of Dodge. He didn't like the fact that the states were losing so many rights. So that's a little bit of the historical context of Elbridge Gerry. And then because of that, they draw that famous cartoon that looks like a salamander, and then they adopt his name to it. So if I can have my panelists come forward, please. And remember, you have questions, and just to give you a little information about the League of Women Voters. We are a nonpartisan organization. We do not take sides on political parties, but we are involved politically. We certainly believe in education, voter education as well. And so this evening, we have a panel with 3 legislators and Julia Vaughn of Common Cause. And what I'm going to do first is let everyone take their selfies, kind of backwards. Cheer, like I'm here. I did not test these microphones, so I bet they have switches. Yes, okay. And so we'll have to do a little testing. So why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself and tell maybe what your passion is on the issue. And we'll start with Ms. Vaughn.
Good evening. I'm Julia Vaughn. I'm the Policy Director for Common Cause Indiana. Really happy to be here tonight and see all of you folks here as well.
My name is Carey Hamilton. I'm a new state representative from the north side of Indianapolis, and I campaigned on this issue. I represent a very competitive district, one of the few competitive districts in Indiana, and I'm extremely passionate. The very first person I called to have a meeting with after I won was Julia.
I'm Jerry Torr, and welcome to District 39. Again, I said my name is Jerry Torr. We stopped calling us Gerrymandering. It's kind of a different term to that, too, but I understand the history of it. I had a different experience than some of my newer colleagues in that the first 10 of the first 12 years of my tenure in the State House was in the minority, even though my party got a majority of the votes every single election cycle during that period of time because of gerrymandering districts. So I have had a passion for this a long time. I'm happy to say that every time I've authored a bill for a bipartisan process, Speaker Brian Bosma has co-authored. We passed the bill out of the House the first time, I think, in 2006. And the Senate, the reason they gave that year for not doing it was that we didn't take into account that not all senators are up, only half the senators are up for re-election in the next election after redistricting. And we had not taken into account what would happen if there were 2 incumbent senators or whatever. And to be fair, that's an issue that we hadn't thought through. But rather than try to think it through during the rest of the session, they decided not to hear the bill. We lost the majority, and by the way, at that time there were only 2 or 3 of the minority party, the Democrats at the time, that voted for the bill. Now that they're in a minority and my party's in a supermajority, they seem to all be for it all of a sudden. But back in 2005, there were only 3, I think, Lynn Moses and John Day was for it, but he may have been sick the day we had the vote, but there were just a handful. Most of the Republicans voted for it in 2005. We passed the bill again in 2014, and I think Hamilton was well called for a while, but that one was a little more bipartisan. More Democrats that supported it at that time. We had a bill this year after a 2-year summer study committee, or interim study committee, a 2-year ordeal here that I chaired, and we had some top experts come in and talk to us about what was done in other states and so forth. And again, we bipartisan efforts to put together recommended legislation. And I filed that, I think Julia was House Bill 1014.
Yeah.
And we did do a committee hearing on it, but it was fairly late in the first half. And unfortunately, we had 100 members of the House, and so even though the study committee took 2 years to put this thing together, some of the committee members and other members of the House had their own ideas about some things that should be done. So the chairman decided not to have a vote on the bill. But I'll introduce you next year, and hopefully we'll continue to move forward.
I'm Donna Schaibley. I represent District 24, which is Western Hamilton County and Southeastern Boone. Carmel, Westfield, Zion, a little bit of Whitestown. Carey has one of the most competitive. I have one of the least competitive districts, I would say, in the state. Why I am interested in this issue, I've been involved in politics my whole life, and worked the polls and, try to get people out to vote. And we have very good turnout. And I think part of it is competitive. So I would like to see more people involved in the political process, and I think that redistricting could help that.
Thank you. So with, again, audience members, you have cards, and so once you fill them out, feel free to raise your hand up, and we will look at those. I think one thing, you introduce yourself, so why don't you tell us a little bit about Common Cause? Some people might not be familiar with that, and what that organization does, and particularly your interest in this particular issue.
Right. Well, Common Cause is a national organization based in Washington, D.C. We've been around since 1970. We were actually founded by the only Republican to serve in the administration of Lyndon Johnson, a guy named John Gardner. He was Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. And he actually left the Johnson administration because of his opposition to the Vietnam War. And in 1970, he founded this public interest organization. Our goal is open, honest, and accountable government. So we work on issues like campaign finance reform, working to reduce the influence of big money on the political process, legislative ethics and lobbying reform, access to government records, the public records law and open government law. And finally, redistricting reform, which has been our focus for the past several years. We, with the League of Women Voters of Indiana, formed the Indiana Coalition for Independent Redistricting, which is now a 15-member organization, coalition of organizations working to reform the process here in Indiana. What we envision is a group of citizens that looks like Indiana voters, that is diverse in terms of geography, race, ethnicity, gender, that would get together in the year after the federal census when we've got the new data about where Hoosiers live, and that they would then have the job of drawing legislative and congressional districts. We think this is important because, as Representative Torr pointed out, Democrats gerrymandered when they had the majority. And that's what political parties do. As long as it's going to be a political party, the party in control will gerrymander. And so certainly while Democrats did it when they had the opportunity, I think Republicans in the State House have done it when they had the opportunity. Now, I don't think that redistricting reform is going to turn a red state blue. I think that Indiana is naturally a somewhat Republican state, but I don't think we are a state that is majority Republican. So I think we could expect a redistricting process that is done more by citizens and outside of the legislative process. I think we're still going to have Republican majorities, but we probably would not see the supermajorities that are in place now. It is a conflict of interest. As long as the players get to also be the umpires, it is going to be a process that the citizens say, you know, we really just don't trust that the outcomes here are going to be fair to all voters in Indiana. So we want to see a process that is independent of the legislature. And while we did support House Bill 1014, we thought it could have been improved in some ways. And as we advocated throughout the study committee process, we would have liked to have seen a process where the members of the Redistricting Commission weren't directly appointed by the legislature. That's one of the key things, you know, how can they be really independent of the legislature if they're appointed by those very same people. Now, we appreciated in House Bill 1014, there was some recognition that there should be some distance. So there was this entity created called the Nominating Authority. Now, this group would not have appointed people to the commission, but they would have nominated a group of 12 that would have been appointed by the legislative leadership. So there was a recognition that, you know, we should have some distance here, but we had some problems with who the members of the nominating authority were. Now, one of them was the Chief Justice of the Indiana Supreme Court. And we're fine with that. That's a separate branch of government. There are some people who have some unease with that because maps that are challenged could end up before the Indiana Supreme Court. But certainly the Chief Justice would just be nominating people, not appointing them. Now, the three people who would join the Chief Justice would be, under House Bill 1014, the presidents of the three largest universities in the state. And we had some issues with that because we don't think that public university presidents are certainly non-political. Their boards are very political, and in fact, you know, we do have a former governor who is the president of Purdue University, and while I know that former Governor Daniels is pro-redistricting reform, and I could think I could trust him with nominations, there are a whole bunch of other partisans or partisan people in this state who I don't think would trust him. And then there's the fact that, of course, the public universities in Indiana are dependent on the legislature for a lot of funding. So we thought that it would be better if this nominating authority was not just a nominating authority, but actually had the ability to appoint members. And we think it would be good to have the Chief Justice along with a trio, a bipartisan trio of retired judges. You know, we trusted judges to be arbiters and decision makers in their communities. So we think we could trust them to make appointments to a redistricting commission. So we'd like to see a group that is truly independent of the legislature be in charge of redistricting when it comes around in 2021. And when we had started planning this meeting, we had thought that, you know, House Bill 1014, we've had this 2-year study committee process. The public certainly was supportive. 300 people with 24 hours notice of the hearing showed up to show their support for House Bill 1014. That's great. For 90 minutes, public testimony was taken. Dozens of people spoke in support. One person spoke in opposition. You know, groups like the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce. I was really, really happy to see that the business community, at least one member of the business community, stood up in support of this legislation. But ultimately, Representative Smith, chairman of the committee, decided that this was not going to be the year that we would move forward with reform. And I think that is tremendously unfortunate. But I'm really happy that I've heard from so many people who have said, we're not going away. We are absolutely going to continue working for this, and I really appreciate that. So, you know, there are many things that we can do. City council resolutions. 15 local governments have passed resolutions in support of redistricting reform. None of them in Hamilton County, though. So I would like you all to work. Ask your representatives in Carmel, in Fishers, in Noblesville, in Westfield, to get with the other cities in this state who have stood up and said, this is an issue that is important to local government. We need to stand in support of redistricting reform. So that's something that you can absolutely do to help.
Okay, Ms. Vaughn, I'm going to cut you off there.
Okay.
And
I was just getting on my soapbox.
I think your soapbox was used, yes. Check, yes. All right, so I'm going to ask the representatives to respond to anything that Ms. Vaughn said or to add your particular passions for this issue. Representative Hamilton?
Thank you. So just to kind of add some thoughts, some bigger picture thoughts, that it's fabulous background for us to set the stage for this conversation. I guess I want to say, just kind of reiterate in simple terms, there is time to get this right. So it was, who was downtown a couple weeks ago for the hearing? Several of you. Who called a legislator, sent an email. That's awesome. So don't give up. You're here, that means you haven't given up yet. That's great. And keep talking to folks about this. We can make this movement become change in our legislature. I believe that. So we have a couple of years, as we've just seen in the movie, it happens every 10 years. So we have until 2020, 2021 until the next redistricting happens. So we've got a little time to get it right. Ideally, something will happen next year if we can flip the stage. Make that so we're ready to go. But we've got a little time, so don't give up. I'm really hoping, I mentioned this to Julia in an email recently, and I know this coordination is going to happen, but we've got to be smart and savvy. League of Women Voters, Common Cause, AARP, we need, other organizations to work together, and I know this is starting, to come up with a really strategic statewide campaign. And then we need folks at their Lions Club talking about this. I think a key thing for us all to remember when we're talking to our family and friends at church, at family reunions, at work, is that it just reiterates, it's not a partisan issue. We saw in the video, it happens on both sides of the aisle. It doesn't make sense to give people that sort of power. It's human nature to leverage it in a way that you think is helpful to your cause, right? We know that's not a good thing for democracy, though. So I love the idea of the Hamilton County resolutions. And just another, I was talking to a Republican friend the other day about this issue, and they were kind of asking me, learning about it, really hadn't thought about it much over the years. And something that really resonated with was the idea that redistricting takes away competition. And if there's not competition in our government for the people that represent us, that's really bad. We intuitively know that. So that's a nice, easy way to communicate, to start a conversation about why redistricting is
Which means gerrymandering takes away competition.
Yes, it creates all of these safe seats, whether it's Republican or Democrat again.
She said because you did it, so I just want to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. No, yes.
That's okay. Thank you. Representative Torr, you want to add anything?
Yeah, just a couple things I want to respond to. First of all, I sense there's a little bit of cynicism about caucus leaders appointing members of the commission, and also university presidents making nominations to the pool. That was, well, first of all, with the criteria that they're given and the restrictions that they're given to draw the districts, I think even somebody really partisan, if they follow the law, wouldn't be able to come up with gerrymandered districts anyway. But because they don't use the political data, they don't have prior voting history available to them, so you'd have to know the state pretty darn well. The idea of, and also, I mean, remember, the two-year study committee included 4 lay members, one each appointed by each of the caucus leaders, the speaker, the minority leader, the president pro tem of the Senate, the minority leader of the Senate. And we were able to pass a recommendation with no other Republican voting for it, by the way, because Ted Bohm was Speaker Bosma's appointment to the committee, a known Democrat who is has long advocated for redistricting reform. So I think the idea that folks don't take these important appointments seriously and look for people that will do the job in the right way. I just think they will. The other thing is that I'm trying to craft a bill that we can actually pass. We passed a similar bill out of the House twice. We had a smaller commission, only 5. The study committee members felt like 9 would be more representative of, more diversity with 9 members than 5, and it would more reflect the population of the state. But there's got to be some balance. I mean, you could do it kind of like George, just pick somebody from each congressional district and say, hey, you're the commission, unless you can convince us there's some compelling reason why we can't devote the time to it. But there's no way I can get that passed out of the House, and certainly not the Senate. So we're looking for a balance that will bring bipartisanship to the redistricting process, but also can become law, because that's a very important component of this.
And thank you, Representative Torr. Representative Schaibley.
I just want to say, don't be discouraged. Legislation sometimes takes a while. I've had, worked, and I've only been there a couple of years, so I can't really complain, but I've worked on something for a couple of years and didn't get a hearing this year, and I'll be back next year. But it does sometimes take a while. The slow process often, I know it's frustrating, but it's good in that, there's more input. We have input from, the members of the community and very thoughtful people. So that's all I want to say. Please don't be discouraged, and there is time, and we can still move forward.
We have varying levels of education about this issue in the audience. We have some people who are here maybe curious about it for the first time, others, who have been fighting the good fight, trying to change the system. So a couple of you have referenced rules, and we also saw that in the video. So why don't you share with us, like, what specific rules exist, via court decisions and things of that nature, as far as how districts have to be drawn, whether they're gerrymandered or not. There are rules that exist, and there didn't used to be as many as what there are now. Okay.
Sure. Well, I'll start. Well, the first one, and it's really the whole reason why we redistricted in the first place, is equal population. So that's, and the current districts are very, very equal in population, down to, 1 or 2 voters, not 1 or 2%, but literally 1 or 2 individuals. So that's the first thing, and that is a federal mandate coming down from a 1964 decision, Baker versus Carr. The second is that districts have to respect the Voting Rights Act. Minority voters can't be packed into a few districts, and then they can't be cracked or distributed into many districts, and that's, again, a federal requirement coming down from the Voting Rights Act. Indiana law has one other requirement, and that is contiguity, meaning a district has to be connected in all points. It can't, start over here, have something in the middle, and then pick up over there, so it has to be connected at all points. So those are the only statutory requirements for districts in Indiana. That is an important thing, though. We need to have not only the who draws the districts, that's an important question, but how districts are drawn. So we'd like to see the statute amended so that things like compactness, competitiveness, and respect for communities of interest are also statutory requirements when it comes time to draw districts in 2021.
Thank you. Ms. Vaughn, representatives, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. But the committee spent some time talking about the issue of competitiveness versus communities of interest, and exactly what that term means, by the way. But to me, that means respecting the boundaries of actual political subdivisions, cities, towns, townships, school districts, wherever possible. And I think to a person, every member of the study committee felt like that was most important, was to keep those communities of interest together. After, of course, the equal population and compactness. And you would tend to get compactness with that when the districts were drawn after the 2010 census, in the 2011 General Assembly. I know when they first showed me the map, because I've been working on this issue since 2005, they knew I was going to be looking to see that there were more square lines and not all the crazy districts we had previously that ran up through the middle of 5 counties along 31 and that kind of thing. So when I first looked at the map, I saw this little squiggle right at the bottom of Johnson County. And I said, wait a minute, what is this? And I forget who was showing me the map, but they explained, oh, that's Edinburgh. Edinburgh is split between Johnson and Bartholomew counties. And we felt like it was more important to keep Edinburgh together in the same district than to follow the county line. And I said, okay, fair enough. Those are the things that I think are important beyond what's legally required.
And thank you, Representative Torr. So let's talk about another rule, kind of, I guess, is the fact that legislation passes a certain way. And so there's a process to pass legislation. You introduce a bill, it goes to a committee, the committee chair calls for a hearing, there's testimony, and then what happens? You know, so like we have options here, right, of what can happen. And so this questioner wants to know, like, why didn't the bill move forward, especially with a vast amount of testimony in favor of the bill, one naysayer, why not advance the bill?
Well, the study committee, as I said, I was the only Republican who voted for the report and for the recommended legislation. The Senate Republican members and the Senate lay appointee from the President Pro Tem all voted no. As I indicated earlier, we've had resistance since 2006 from the Republican leadership in the Senate. So, we had some internal debate about do we move the bill and send it over to the Senate with the likelihood that they're not going to do anything with it, or do we continue to build consensus? Kind of late in the first half toward the committee deadline, the Speaker and Senator Vaughn had some discussions, and the Speaker asked Chairman Smith to at least give the bill a hearing, which he did. But again, because of the lateness of the committee meeting, there were members on the committee who, in all fairness, had not participated in the two-year study committee, that had some of their own ideas about, some of them were bothered by the university president's idea also. And by the way, that's just something that one member of the committee came up with one day at our lunch. We were just looking for a way to get people from around the state and some geographic diversity in putting together the pool. And so I've always said we're open to any other idea that anybody wants to throw out as to who might nominate. But members of the committee did have some other thoughts about some things they'd like to see included in the bill or changed, and they didn't have an opportunity to prepare committee amendments because of the late notice of the committee. So for that reason, Chairman Smith, now this is no guarantee that he's going to hear it early next year and have amendments and so forth, but nevertheless, I think he had a fairly, my hope was that we'd move it back the very first week of committee meetings, but that did not happen and was outside of my control. We also have some reluctance within our caucus. Again, as I said, 10 of my first 12 years were, I served in the minority, and in 10 years, passed one bill as lead author. That's how they treated us when we were in a minority. We try not to do that now, by the way. Speaker Bosma has, I think, a much more bipartisan process, a much more open process. All of our committee meetings now are on the internet live. Our session is on the internet live, and you can also go back later and watch it on the archive. But it wasn't always that way. And so I know what it's like to serve in the majority, or the minority under gerrymandered districts. We have so many new members in our House Republican caucus. Probably, I think a majority of our members now in our caucus have never served in the minority, have no idea what it's like. And so some of them still buy into the old, to the victor go the spoils, you know, why should we give up the opportunity to draw our own districts? And so what we need is time to build consensus within our caucus to make folks more comfortable. And don't get me wrong, I mean, there are many folks in our caucus, even some of the newer members that have never been in the minority, who support this, but there are others that don't. And it's a thing we have to work on.
Thank you, Representative Torr. And so I guess that working on is kind of the question, you know, I understand change in government happens when it happens, sometimes slowly, I guess.
It took me 8 years to free workers from forced union dues, so I won't give up.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I said it took me 8 years to get the legislature to free workers from forced union dues.
Right
so
to work?
Really?
Hey, Representative Hamilton, what would you like to say?
Well, I'll just, I think maybe here's what I'll say. If my caucus were the larger caucus right now, I could imagine that the internal caucus dialogue would make it nearly impossible to get a vote if the public isn't pushing for it.
Yeah.
Because that vote would have put some people on the record not supporting redistricting, right? And I will say, absolutely, we would have had the same predicament. So this, again, not picking on Republicans, absolutely. It's the nature of the beast. That's why we have work to do.
Okay. Ms. Vaughn, would you like to add anything?
Well, it's just that, there's been some talk that, well, we didn't have the support on the committee, so it wasn't going to pass, so what's the point in voting? Well, because that's what people are elected to do.
Right.
They're elected to make tough votes, and we would have known then on the committee who was supportive and who's not. So, I think, and I've been told several different stories by Representative Smith. I talked to him on the first day of session, and it was, yeah, we're going to get the bill in hearing. So we've just got to continue to get stronger at the grassroots level. We've got to get stronger inside the legislature, and I'm really glad that these three folks are supportive of reform and are willing to work inside the process, because there's an inside and an outside game going on here, and I think we're doing really, really well on the outside game, but it's going to take a lot to change the attitudes inside the General Assembly.
Sure.
And can I just quickly, I just want to say, it is easier for me to say what I'm saying than it is for these two. So I really commend them both for being out here on this issue right now.
A questioner just asked, why can the committee chair call a vote on his own? So they're asking for the government lesson, why, why can't, if there's something before the committee, why can't the committee say, well, we're going to vote on this?
Yeah, well, that's been the process forever, and it's the same in the United States Congress, and as far as I know, in every state legislature in the country. It's the chairman's prerogative whether or not to even give a bill a hearing, and whether we can debate whether it's good or bad, but I can tell you that has saved us from a lot of really silly or bad legislation over the years. But it is the chairman's prerogative. and that's just the way it's always been. Public pressure is really the only thing that will probably force a change in that. But I do think that I am really hopeful that next year, if we start earlier, and the committee members and the other legislators that weren't involved in the study committee process, if they had an opportunity to be heard and have their thoughts included, or at least considered, I'm really hopeful that we'll get a vote next year, and I'll be disappointed if we don't.
Okay, thank you, Representative Torr. Let me combine a couple of questions. These questioners want to know about the specific process for drawing the districts, and like who does it, who, I understand who would, like politically perhaps under whatever rule, there would be people assigned to figure this out. That like what process do they use? Is there a computerized program, like I guess Redistricting RS, or that feature that we can use? And then also, what kind of guidance do other states who have this provide to us? So who'd like to go first?
Well, they take a big state map and a Sharpie. Now, Julie can probably do this in more detail than I can, but it is very simple these days with the computer programs that are available. It's very simple to, you get a different map if you start in the northeast corner of the state versus if you start in Marion County and work out, or start in Evansville and go this way. The maps turn out differently, so there are some variables, but basically, as I understand it, you tell the computer software what the guidelines are. It's pretty simple, right?
Yeah, but I don't know if I'd say simple, but because there's a lot of different things to consider. But yeah, the software is amazing. What was used in 2011 is called Maptitude. And the way it works, and it would work similarly under the reform process that we envision, instead of being directed by a legislative committee, which is the same elections committee that deal with legislation. They're also the legislators in charge, sort of first in line on the new districts. But they are assisted by a Republican and a Democratic staffer with the Legislative Services Agency. And these people are experts in the GIS technology. Also what happens is consultants come in from out of state. That's certainly typical, and one of the things that we'd like to not see happen should the system be reformed. But yeah, it's very much GIS technology, and there's professional staff within the Legislative Services Agency that are the ones that actually staff the process.
Okay, thank you. Anything, part of the question wasn't answered. Okay, so the second part of the question was, what guidance can other states provide us?
Certainly there are a few states that have a different system. You saw California's, which is really, from our perspective, the gold standard, not one that we're likely to model too much, but we think it's something that we could certainly borrow some good characteristics from. Arizona has a redistricting commission that is interesting, and I particularly like the way they deal with communities of interest. The very first thing they do as part of their process is send their commission out to do just dozens of town meetings all around the state. They ask people to come and pinpoint on the map and identify their community of interest, whether it's a neighborhood, whether it's a business district, a school district, an Indian reservation, what is your community of interest? So we'll be aware of it when we go to draw the map. So that's an interesting thing we can learn from Arizona. Washington State has a really cool characteristic that we think the General Assembly should borrow. They actually, at the end of their commission's process, they give the maps to the legislature, and the legislature has a very limited ability to tweak the districts. They can't move around more than 2% of the population, but we think this makes sense from a couple of different perspectives. Number one, legislators know their districts well. Representative Hamilton was out walking around her, so she knows it pretty well. And the other one is, we've had some argument, one of the big questions we got at the committee hearing, those of you who were there, say there are opponents who say this isn't constitutional because the Indiana Constitution says the legislature has to draw the maps. Well, we think that they will still have a very big say under a new process because they will continue to have to vote on maps up or down. But if we borrow the Washington, they get a tweak at the end, that's even more ability for them to draw the maps. So we can certainly learn from a lot of different states. There was a state that was held up during the study committee process, Iowa. We're always tell people to be very cautious about Iowa, as the expert who came in and testified told folks it's not a very good model simply because it is a unique state. There are some good examples out there that we can learn from.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on that issue? All right, the questioners want to know about, does anyone know how many of our state legislators ran unopposed in the 2016? Did you like this question?
No,
Okay.
not in 2016. I can rattle off the numbers for 2014. It was 44 out of 100 in the House.
Wow.
10 out of 25.
Okay, and there was a questioner who asked about the state constitution, and whether it would allow something like House Bill 1014 to be enacted.
Yeah, that was, we are a little bit hamstrung. We can't just simply turn the redistricting over to a commission and have them draw maps and say, oh, here are your maps, and draw them on the map. They do have to be voted on by the legislature because the Constitution is very clear that the General Assembly apportions districts for the legislature and for Congress. So I think really some of the opponents are just kind of using this constitutional issue to kind of throw the wet blanket over the deal because we had, I've had discussions with former Chief Justice Shepard, but we had a letter that I passed out to committee members from retired Justice Bowman and retired Justice Dixon. And all three believe that the system we came up with our bill back in 2005 and continue to look at would meet constitutional muster if it got to the Supreme Court. So I'm not really concerned about that. Someday maybe we should look at, in fact I had filed in the past a resolution to have a referendum to change the Constitution to allow the legislature to delegate. But there's a lot of trepidation among legislators on that. And so I think we need to get a bipartisan redistricting process in the works first, and then let the legislature, hopefully down the road, take another look at whether we should change the Constitution to specifically say that it can be delegated.
Several questioners have asked questions about seemingly the lack of urgency by the state, General Assembly to act. It's, oh, well, it doesn't matter, since this is 2020, we got plenty of time on this. And I think there's frustration that, from some of the people here that, kind of like how long do we wait type of, syndrome. And, the recommendation for a plan of action as far as what to do. So why don't we go to you first, Representative Hamilton, on all of that, those sort of questions that maybe not. Do your best.
Okay. So I guess a couple of thoughts. One, I think soon there'll start to be action around, planning and visible, a few months, give us a few months, right? And I feel urgency, but I also know it does take a few years, as Representative Schaibley mentioned, to get things done in the legislature. So this year, and I know Gary's been working on this for many years, but this hearing was a big deal. So we should, actually, I think we should feel proud, all of us, especially Representative Torr, for getting a hearing and having a packed state house and having packed rooms like this again and again and again in recent months. And we just have to keep this up and really build the public pushback. If you're a legislator, not Donna, because she's exceptional and hardworking and good, but others who may be, who we will never name, but who might be in a 70% state district, regardless of party, why in the world would they care about this issue if their people aren't beating down their doors, telling them it's time for you, my representative, to stand up on this important issue. If you care about democracy, you're going to vote for this and make it happen. So there's still a lot of grassroots work to do, is my point.
Okay, anyone else on this issue?
Well, I agree that we just have to keep the pressure on, and you know, write your legislator, write your senator. I mean, I take letters very, you know, personally. I mean, I read every letter that comes in. It means a lot to me. I mean, if I get a stack of letters, I pay attention, and I can tell you the legislators do as well. So, other than I. So, that's what I would recommend.
Who has family in another county? A couple of them. Oh, good, more. Come on, people. My sister's here. She lives in Hamilton County. I live in Marion County. And we had a great family conversation yesterday by kind of a family gathering about this issue. And we were all learning from each other. And so it reminds me just to, you know, wherever you are, talk to people about this issue. You will see light bulbs going off in any group of people, because a lot of people aren't thinking about this. So you can make an impact just in your everyday conversations.
Yeah, is anybody a member of the Chamber of Commerce? You know, you need to go to the Chamber of Commerce and tell them that this is an issue that's important to the business community. You know, if competition is good for business, then it should be good for politics as well. So we need the business community involved. If you're part of a neighborhood group or a service club, you know, I'm sure those are audiences that are ripe for this issue. We need help in terms of planning events. One of the things we're wanting to do is a gerrymander meander race around one of these districts. We need to do Elbridge Gary's birthday is July 17th, and we always celebrate it, and so we definitely need to have a big celebration this year. So we just need folks, you know, again, sort of getting the fever, reaching out, letters to the editor. You know, right after the hearing, we had several published in the Indianapolis Star and in papers all across the state. Several of them generated editorials by the newspapers. So we just have to continue talking about this, talking to key people. One of the things that, you know, a lot of folks didn't see because it happened behind the scenes, but a lot of very influential Republicans have been part of this discussion. They've been talking to legislators and the leadership behind the scenes. There are many folks who see that, you know, this whole process has tilted the Republican Party to an ideological bent that they don't think the party needs to go. So we need more and more of that. Republicans who want to stand up and say, this is going to be good for our party. This is not bad for Republicans in Indiana. This will build a stronger party. So we're glad that's happening, but we need more of it. Sure.
I really like stressing the business community element, and I'll share an example of how I think gerrymandering has had a negative impact that the business community can relate to. The state chamber, the Indy chamber, Cummins, major banks, major employers across our state, Lilly, and the United Way all came together on pre-K funding this year. They determined it was a smart investment. Most states are doing it already, well over 40. And I think that if there were more competitive districts and a little more balance in the legislature represented over a state, that we would be making more progress this year than we are. And that's a powerful message to business leaders. And they're seeing this. That's one of several examples where, you know, business community that's traditionally a little more conservative is seeing that a supermajority, regardless of party, is not helpful.
Thank you, Representative Hamilton. Okay, I've had a couple of questioners ask about the chair of the Election Reform Committee and whether that person's in a district that's safe and when that person comes up for re-election. Safe district, I guess. So.
Well, everybody's in the House of Representatives is up for re-election next year. So Representative Smith is from Columbus, Indiana, and interestingly, both elections committee chairs are from Columbus, Indiana. So that is obviously a place where we need to get stronger. If you have friends, family, distant relatives in Columbus, please let them know the importance of this issue and how they really have an oversized say being constituents. And I really feel like had Representative Smith been hearing more from his constituents, we know he got hundreds, if not thousands, of phone calls from people from all over the state, but I guarantee you if hundreds of those had been from Columbus, he probably wouldn't have felt so secure in shutting the bill down without a vote. So we need to get in his backyard. Seymour, Indiana. You know, Representative Lucas was one of the more vocal opponents. And I guess I would say that I would hope maybe next year we might consider another committee, because this doesn't necessarily have to go to elections. There's always rules and legislative procedures, which Representative Torr does share. There's also government and regulatory reform, which wouldn't be as friendly as rules, but I might perhaps another avenue, because I'll tell you, when I saw the committee appointments this year and I saw the new members of elections, I was like, oh my gosh, we've got our work cut out for us. So we absolutely have to get stronger in the backyards of the committee members. Goshen, Indiana is another hot spot. Representative Nicely is very skeptical about this bill as well.
Okay, anything else to add on that by the representatives? And then the leadership in each house controls who the committee chairs are. And so are there ever any deviations, I guess, would be a way of kind of consolidating some of these questions. Like, you know, is there a possibility for change in the future? You know, if the people are, the same people are elected, how often do committee chairs turn over?
Well, committee chairs do change. We've seen some of that. Typically, though, the idea is for a committee chair to build expertise in particular issues that that committee deals with, and have them there for longer periods of time. But because a lot of times there's an issue that came up 4 or 5 years ago. If you don't have people on the committee that know that, they don't know what the history is and what the unintended consequences might be, and so forth, that we're all vetted 5 years earlier. But certainly there are changes, and the speaker makes the committee appointments after the speaker's elected, after every election cycle. So every 2 years, there are new committee chairs appointed, and they certainly can change.
Thank you.
I would have to say it's unlikely.
It won't before.
Unlikely because it's usually a 2 year.
Right, we will have the same committee chairs for this year.
Yes.
So it would be after the event.
So that's why I suggest maybe another committee.
Okay. From the questions, I sense a sense of urgency by members of the audience on this issue. And, you know, particularly wanting to know what can be done now. And so you address that issue, I think, as far as making those connections in different cities and towns and communities across the state. And then also, you can also become members of organizations that are active in this area, such as Common Cause, League of Women Voters, for the small club, and you know, other community groups, you know, to get involved. And so hopefully I've addressed this issue. And we've had a couple of people ask about the handout that we gave to some people, the people who came early. The people who came later and we ran out of it. Do we get more? Oh, so raise your hand. Our happy passer hours will distribute this handout to you. But the question has been about a hybrid system. And so it says something like that on the handout that I didn't get a copy of either. Like Indiana system and a hybrid system. And so questioners wanted to know about that. A hybrid is usually kind of a combo plan. It just says.
Yeah, I don't see it where.
Oh, I think I thought I knew. What that is referring to is in our current process in Indiana, we do have for congressional redistricting only if the General Assembly is unable to come up with maps. And this did actually happen in 2001 because the House and Senate did not agree on what the congressional districts were going to be. So there is a backup commission that is constituted. It's appointed by the 4 legislative leaders and then 1 person appointed by the governor, correct? Yeah, the governor. And so they come together and this is just for congressional districts. And so in 2001, they were constituted. I don't think, yeah, they did actually come up with some maps, but really what they served to do was kind of force the General Assembly into a compromise. So that's a hybrid system where you have the General Assembly has the primary responsibility, but if something goes wrong with that process, then you have a backup.
Okay, any other comments on that? Okay, and it wasn't a hybrid car, so it's all right, so we have Indiana right now controlled by Republicans, and so obviously Democrats would support this. And so why should Republicans support it? What reason would you give to people in the audience maybe who aren't supporters? Why should Republicans support this?
Well, first of all, not all Democrats supported it when we had a vote in 2014. And most of them did in 2006. But again, they were in the majority in 2006. The Republicans should support it because it's good government, good public policy. And it's just the way our government ought to be run.
Okay, thank you. Representative Torr, anything else? Yes.
Well, and I would just mention that, you know, we just turned 200 years old here in Indiana, and as part of that process, we got together a whole bunch of esteemed Hoosiers who sat down and identified those issues that are the most pressing, the most important for Indiana to deal with over our next 100 years. And redistricting reform made that list. And so I think that, you know, there's been an awful lot of thoughtful people look at this and figure out that this is something that's very foundational to the future of elections in our state. And as Representative Schaibley said, you know, we do not do well in terms of voter participation here. We had the lowest participation in the country in 2014. So anything that we can do to convince voters that there is a reason to participate. And we won't have 100 competitive House districts and 50 competitive Senate districts in Indiana, even with redistricting reform. There's a certain amount of self-sorting that goes on. Certainly Hamilton County is a good place to talk about that. And, you know, there are the opposites of Hamilton County and other places in Indiana, like Lake County up in the northwest part of the state. But certainly there is more natural competition that exists in Indiana than the handful of races that are competitive. And I think that is even truer, not just in the state house, but at the congressional level. When I started, and those are much higher profile, you know, races. It's not that these people aren't important, but, you know, we tend to pay attention to our members of Congress even more. And so that could really drive turnout. And when I started doing this work, you know, we had, number one, 10 congressional districts, not 9, but every 2 years, at least half of those were competitive. That gave people a reason to participate in the process, and I think we can get back to that in our state.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. I'm going to combine a couple of questions. One questioner wants to know if you can introduce similar legislation in multiple committees. And I know the answer to that one, but I'll let one of you guys answer. And then if there's a white paper or some type of study specific to Indiana that might show how districts in Indiana could be changed to be more competitive. Excuse me.
Well, the answer to the first one is really simple. Individual legislators file bills with the clerk's office. The speaker, at his sole discretion, assigns them to the appropriate committee to consider them based on the expertise of the members of the committee and the purpose of the committee. While it's a nice idea to say, why wouldn't I just talk the speaker into sending my bill to my committee that I chair, the committee that Representative Smith or Chairman Smith chairs is called Election and Apportionment. This is clearly within the purview of that committee, and that's the only appropriate place for it to be.
Sure, Representative Hamilton. Thank you, Representative Torr.
Thank you. I'm going to use my panelist microphone prior to go back to the last question, because I really want to come to the question about why would Republicans care about this issue. And I'll say for the same reason anyone who believes our democracy, because it is good for government. And back to that point of competition. So I mentioned I'm in a competitive seat, one of not enough competitive seats. My new state senator, so I'm new, and my new state senator, Senator Ruckelshaus, is also in a competitive seat. We've been hosting bipartisan constituent forums. We've had 200 people in an elementary school. And a wonderful, robust dialogue at these meetings. But it's relatively easy for us to do this. If I were a super safe, Bloomington, Indiana Democrat, would I even be able to have a civil constituent forum with my rural Republican neighbor in a safe seat? Would our constituents want us to do that? That's competition. That's your Republican argument.
Let me just mention a couple of answers to the question in terms of I'm not aware of any white paper that shows that there is more natural competition in Indiana, but you can go to a website called leadorleave.org. Tom Sugar, who was a member of the study committee, has put together a nice website that does some simulation into the current districts, and if things were done a little bit differently, the more competitive districts that would exist. I would also mention a study that was done by the University of Chicago Law Review in 2014 that tested a new legal theory that measures partisan gerrymandering. It's called the efficiency gap. And I was just in North Carolina last week with the folks who developed the efficiency gap and a lot of really brilliant people who are working on this challenge to gerrymandering in states all around the country. And I would really encourage folks to look at the University of Chicago study. It looks at a number of different legislative maps throughout the country, including the Wisconsin map, which a federal court in that state has ruled unconstitutional because of partisan gerrymandering. That case is called Whitford versus Gill. It is on its way to the United States Supreme Court, and if it is upheld, you can bet that other similar cases will be filed in states throughout this country. So we have some very important litigation that could really be the secret weapon to end this practice for good. And I think there are responsible people inside the General Assembly who will recognize that if the federal courts are now saying that partisan gerrymandering is unconstitutional, they will be responsible and put a Citizens Commission in place before 2021, because if they don't, any maps drawn by partisans will be challenged. That's just the bottom line.
And I have a question here about the efficiency gap. It asks for you to explain it and what percentage of the efficiency gap is seen in Marion County and Indiana as a whole. And, so anything else you would like to add?
Well, I can't talk about the efficiency gap in Marion County alone because it would be done on a statewide basis. But basically what the efficiency gap is, and I'm nowhere near as brilliant as Nick Stephanopoulos, the guy from the University of Chicago who came up with this, but it is a response to Justice Anthony Kennedy, who in a Supreme Court case called Lulac versus Perry, said that, racial gerrymandering has been recognized by the courts for many years, and so there have been a number of maps that have been thrown out because they violate the Voting Rights Act on our racial gerrymanders. But partisan gerrymanders, before the decision late last year in Wisconsin, no maps have ever been thrown out for those reasons. So this is precedent setting. And Justice Kennedy, though, in the Lulac case said that I'm willing to recognize that partisan gerrymandering could be unconstitutional because it renders an individual's vote meaningless, but I've got to know when we get to the tipping point. When is a district drawn to the point where it really isn't winnable? So that's what the efficiency gap is. It's actually a mathematical formula that can be applied to individual districts to measure when you get to the tipping point and when a challenger really just doesn't have any chance. So again, this is pretty new stuff, and it does have to go before the United States Supreme Court, but it was pretty much tailor-made for the swing justice on this case, who said, give me the formula. If I can measure it, then I'm willing to say, okay, this map is a partisan gerrymander and it's unconstitutional. So they will get to that case probably in the late summer or early fall. So stay tuned.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. Questioners have asked, our maps now that exist in Indiana, do you think they've been drawn with a particular purpose in mind? And if so, what purpose? Your opinion.
Yeah, I think, the party in power is always going to draw maps that increase the chances of its candidates getting elected. That is, again, it's been legal in the process, so why wouldn't they do it? Now, it's absolutely true that the maps that were drawn in 2011, particularly the House maps, are much more regularly shaped. Certainly, they look prettier, they look less unusual, there are less salamanders, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't drawn with an eye to benefit one party over the other. Certainly, again, we're a more Republican state than we are a Democrat state. So Democrats have to get more creative to gerrymander than Republicans do. So again, we need a process that is conflict-free. We need a process that is done out in the open. Because, people can always say, well, no, these maps were fair. We didn't look at political data. Well, we'll never know because we weren't part of that process. They were all done behind closed doors. So we just can't take people's words for it. We need a process that is done by the public in public. To make sure that these maps are actually drawn in the public interest. Because, let's remember, they're the voters' districts, right? That's who they really belong to. And so we need to play a much bigger role in drawing them.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. Representative Torr, I have a question for you. Several people have written cards complimenting you on your advocacy on this issue and appreciative of that. And so moving forward, what changes do you think would be needed in similar bills such as House Bill 1014? What changes would you be thinking about for the future, based on, what you've heard and what you've learned?
It's hard to predict that, but based on the feedback that I've gotten, one of the main things is the way the pool is put together for the final 5 members of the commission. I don't think we'll pass a bill that gets away from at least one member of the commission appointed by each of the caucus heads. I think that's something we just probably have to live with, and I hope that they'll appoint thoughtful people like Ted Bowman. And certainly there's a bunch of restrictions in the legislation about who they can't appoint. So they can't appoint somebody like the state Democrat chairman or something like that. I mean, that's all spelled out in the bill. So with the criteria, they got to find somebody that's never shown any real partisanship, one way or the other, anyway, or at least to any extent. But I think that's the biggest stumbling block. I don't think it's specific changes in the legislation so much as just kind of getting legislators motivated and understanding that. I mean, I put this on my constituent survey pre-session, and I think it was 77% in favor, and that's a pretty bipartisan number. A lot of Republicans think we need this too, that aren't legislators. So I think really the key to it isn't so much how we change the bill, but changing the minds of legislators and I guess getting them to understand that it's not only a question where people check yes, I think that's a good idea, but a lot of people are really passionate about it.
Okay, thank you, Representative Torr. A couple of last questions. Wanting to know if someone could publish a schedule of upcoming milestones that will help direct the activism that is percolating in the audience. And is there a national group working to make fair redistricting happen nationwide? So publication of upcoming milestones to help or to steer activism, and then a national group nationwide. And Representative Torr?
Well, let me just say that I do think it would be helpful, and I don't know who's working on it, but a national push to have some kind of system for the congressional districts would be helpful, because some of the feedback I got from caucus members, at least 1 or 2, is let's say we understand doing this for our House and Senate districts here in Indiana, but why should we do this for our congressional districts when other states don't have to, and other states can still gerrymander? And it's hard to argue with that. You know, as long as other states are doing it, why do we give up the right to counterbalance what another state may be doing? And you may agree or disagree with that, but that's some of the pushback we got from caucus members. And so if there was a national push to force the hand of states to do something in the congressional districts, I think it would be helpful.
Thank you, Representative Torr. Ms. Vaughn, did you want to add to that?
Of course, one of the problems is that Congress is pretty gridlocked too, and one of the major reasons is gerrymandering. So I know there's been some legislation introduced that would help facilitate a fairer process. I guess I'm not too optimistic that that's going to move forward, but we certainly think that any reformed process that happens here in Indiana should include both congressional and state legislative districts. That isn't always the case. In fact, our neighbors to the east, Ohio, passed a ballot initiative in 2015 that includes a commission. It's kind of a political commission, but it wouldn't be the legislature, but they will only be drawing their state legislative maps, not Congress. In fact, they're trying to go back and get another ballot initiative passed that would include congressional districts. In terms of milestones, I would invite you to follow Common Cause Indiana on Facebook. We do a much better job of keeping that updated than I do my webpage on our national website. I would also invite you to subscribe. We maintain, along with the League of Women Voters and our coalition, a listserv that is exclusive to redistricting. So we'll let you know when we have events coming up, things that we need public participation in. So please give me your email address before we leave here tonight if you're interested in that, and I will make sure you get on that list to be updated about upcoming events.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Vaughn. At this time, I'm going to let panel members make a 1-minute closing statement if you'd like to add anything or anything that you would like to add at that time.
Really, no, just that, please recognize that this isn't a sprint. It is going to be a marathon, and what we're trying to do is extremely difficult. Because the perception, I think, inside the legislature is that they'd be giving something up. And I would think we have to recognize that that is the perception. But again, helping to educate them, I'm excited that Representative Hamilton has agreed to work with us to host a session before the end of the legislative session this year to get all of those freshman legislators together, to educate them about the study committee process, what House Bill 1014 encompassed, and why they need to support reform. We need your help in going to third House meetings at any opportunity you have to interact with your lawmakers. We really need to get the Indiana Senate off this idea that the Constitution needs to be amended to do this, because it doesn't need to be. And public support for that falls tremendously. The Senate, most of them asked their question about this differently. They asked, should the Constitution be amended to have a redistricting commission? I've heard that the response to that was about 25%, as opposed to when the question is asked in the way that Representative Torr and others asked it, should we have an independent redistricting commission in Indiana? It's 3/4 of the public support system. So, let's talk about this in the way that is correct, that is appropriate for Indiana, but I guess the most important thing is let's keep talking about this.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. Representative Hamilton?
Yeah, just very quickly, I'll say I think it's important, let's not vilify anyone moving forward. Let's just remember, it doesn't, or this is how I think about it. If you give someone the ability to make it easier to keep a job they love or care about, or, it's human nature. Legislators shouldn't have that ability, right? We need to take that away and make it competitive. So stay at the table, give it a year or two, don't give up. It's a long game, but it's a huge, important battle, so it should take time.
Thank you, Representative Hamilton. Representative Torr?
All I've talked about, I'm just going to say thanks for coming out.
Representative Schaibley?
I want to say that as well, and I just want to say, don't give up, keep plugging. It is a long game, it's a long haul, but hopefully we can get something done before the next census. Yes, knock on wood, if this is wood. And it's the right thing to do. I mean, I think you have right on your side when you're arguing this point, and that gives you strength.
Thank you, Representative Schaibley. I'd like to give a special shout out to League of Women Voters member Patrice Wagner, who has been very passionate about this issue and has pushed us to consider all angles. I'd like to thank our president, Carey Hamilton, who doesn't like to talk, but she does such a great job of organizing, and she would be a fine talker. And so most of all, I would like to thank all of you for coming out this evening. Thank the library for allowing us to use their facility, and our member Lisa Dick back there, who volunteered to help even though she's on duty. So she looks like me because the library closes at 9, right? Everyone, let's go back.
Oops.